So Dan, you know what I've been thinking about lately?
What?
I've been thinking about an old startup called The Point, and so it started
What's the
with a
point?
yeah. Well, it started the point of the story. It started with a founder who was having trouble canceling his mobile phone service, like of all things, right? And
Yeah.
he wanted to like harness the collective energy, the collective power of a group of people making a choice. And so he wanted to figure out like what can we actually do to get a bunch of people together, like to make a decision. And so he's like, okay, well, we need to test how this is going to work. We need to test if we can get people together. So he's like spun up this WordPress site, and said, like, I wonder if we just like offered a coupon at a pizza place in the ground floor of the building that we're working on. There's a pizza restaurant there. We know the guy. We'll go in and see if we offer a discount, if we can get a bunch of people to do something there, right? And then if they show up and they get pizza, that'll validate our concept that we can get people to do something through this WordPress site, right? So they were doing the test. So they do.
Yeah.
And they ended up, kind of blowing up. Instead of just a couple of people, they had way more people, show up to do this thing, because the premise
Huh.
was they're only going to give you the coupon if you get a certain number of people there. And for those of you
Right.
who've been around for a while, you're like, well, that sounds familiar. That's because at that point they realized that they were onto something much more interesting than what they were on. And they decided to make it into that coupon platform, and the point became Groupon.
No way.
Yes. So
I
that's
love
how,
that.
right? And so there are so many of those kinds of stories where, to put a finer point on it, the business model wasn't quite right, and that's going to seem a little
Yeah.
vague at first, but that's the topic of our show today. So for everyone, welcome to Startup Shop Talk, our weekly live show. I'm your co-host, Josh David Miller, aka JDM, and I'm here with my buddy Dan Cassis Murray. Good morning,
What's
Dan.
going on, folks?
What is up? What is up? What is up? So today, my friends, we are talking about how to pick out the right business model for your startup. It's a big, meaty topic. And so we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about revenue models. We're going to talk about what a business model actually is and how that fits together. We're going to talk about the algorithm that you can use to actually put a structure behind finding the right business model, and then what you do with it next. And then we're going to round it all out of how does this connect to the stage of your current startup. If you're watching this on the replay, check out the chapter markers down in the description so that you can kind of jump around and do what you want. But for those of you who are here live, thank you so much for joining us. We are live every single Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific right here on YouTube for Startup Shop Talk. It's entirely about startups and innovation, from idea to product market fit. So if you're out there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, be notified of the next show that comes out. And I'm curious, while we're getting started here, let us know down in the comments or in the live chat if you're here with us in real time, and let us know what's a pivot you've made in your business model, either on what you're currently working on now or what you've been working on in the past.
Yeah, you know what?
But
I love those pivot cases, because it's always like it's you do it because you need to. Something's not working, so you change it. But when you run a thing through a process, you never know what's going to come out on the other side, and that's always so exciting for me.
yes, isn't it right? Like
I
it's
love
it's
it.
it's the thing that's like it's the drug
Yo,
that
it's
we sign up for
candy.
as founders. Yes, candy. All right, so let's dive in. Let's get started. So Dan, when
Yes.
most people hear business model, they think how I make money, right?
Yeah.
So let's start there. How does a startup make money?
You know,
It seems like a dumb question, but I trust you're going to take that in a place that's not dumb.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a dumb question at all. I think it's actually a more complex question than we give it credit for, because there are loads of different ways to make money. And let's start with basically 6 types of revenue streams that we can talk about. So I got this list from Osterwilder's and Pigneur's Business Model Generation. It came out in 2010. In fact, these are the folks that start, they created the business model canvas, right? And so in their book, they give this overview of things, and revenue streams is one of them. And so they talk about 6 basic types. So let's talk about the 6 basic types. The first one is an asset sale. The second is usage fee. And the third one is lending, renting, or leasing. So an asset sale would be basically, hey, I have a thing. I'm going to give it to you. You're going to pay me money. I'm basically making money based on this asset that I'm giving you. A usage fee is something like, hey, I have a platform and I'm going to allow you to use the platform in exchange for you paying me a fee so that you can use it. And lending, renting, or leasing is basically where I have a thing and I allow you exclusive access to this thing for money. So those are the first three.
Okay. So those are examples of the categories of ways that a startup can make money, right?
Yes.
Because the
Yes.
first three, the asset, usage, and then lend, stroke rent, stroke lease, whatever. Okay, cool. That's three. What are the next three?
Okay. So the next three are subscription, licensing, and advertising. So a subscription, it's basically, I think we all know what the subscription one is now. Like, it's been, in my opinion, overplayed. And it's super fucking annoying as a customer sometimes.
So wait, hold on. So when you say that that subscription is overplayed, what does that literally translate to? Does that mean you're tired of paying subscription fees, or are you saying something deeper about startups just leaning into what's popular and going with the subscription without really evaluating their options? Like, which one
Well,
are you saying?
I think both. As a customer, like, okay, I get it. Subscription fees, I understand. If I'm paying monthly internet service, if I'm paying like monthly streaming, okay, I get it. But when I buy a thing and it comes with an add-on of a subscription service to use the thing over and over again, then that kind of pisses me off. So here's what I feel like. Subscription fees are great if they're appropriate, right? Um, but they can be overused. And here's the thing, I think that a lot of times what we do is, as startup founders, we look at this model, we're like, well, how could it make money? And we pick one, and subscription's great, right? Because we're all talking about it, and it is a great model when it's
Sure.
appropriate. It's awesome. Recurring revenue, like on a semi-passive basis. I mean, shit, who wouldn't want that, right? I get it. I
Right.
totally get it.
Right.
But
Right.
it's not necessarily the other one. It's one of six, right? And
Right. Right. And I love where you're going with that, because the idea that there's one subscription model, or sorry, there's one revenue model that's subscriptions that just makes sense for startups, seems to be the attitude that I encounter with a lot of founders. It seems like anybody who's creating any type of SaaS or like software as a service or a mobile app or anything like that, they go, oh, it's a subscription, duh, because they're all subscription, except that they're not all subscriptions, right?
right,
And
right.
so I think that leads a lot of founders when they're early in the process or even later in the process, to not even consider other options. And they end up like super focused on this idea of like, we're going to do subscriptions. And that's one of six ways of talking about it, let alone that they're not even looking at who else the payer might be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I
okay,
totally
well,
agree.
put in a pin that. So we got
Okay.
these six ways of making revenue. So you said, so run through those six one more time.
So those were four, right? There's asset sale. That's basically like, I have a thing. You're gonna pay me for the thing. Usage, so like bridge toll. That's like usage fee. Lending, renting, or leasing. Cars, houses, whatever. Like getting exclusive access for a particular asset for a specific amount of time. Subscription, which we just waxed poetic on. And there's two more. One is licensing, and then the sixth one is advertising. So licensing is basically, hey, I've made, used to be hey, I wrote a program and now it's yours for a year, and you can basically like use it. Don't give it to anybody else. Don't make copies of it, and don't create letters and spreadsheets and slide decks and give this to other people. Just, you're the only one that's allowed to do it. I don't know if that worked out so much for them, but anyways, that's licensing, right?
Which is probably an NFT based thing if we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
2022, right? Yeah. All right.
And then the sixth one is advertising, and advertising is one that we're all familiar with. It used to be newspapers, right? Back in the day, it was, hey, I'm going to write content and you're going to advertise in the content. And then it was other things like content on the web, and then ads and all that kind of stuff. And then it was, of course, Facebook, which was, hey, we have an audience now. Why don't you, advertiser, use our audience in exchange for a fee, right? And so that's the sixth one, advertising.
Got it. So asset, usage, lend, lease, rent, whatever, subscription, licensing, and finally advertising.
Yes.
Okay, so that naturally begs the question, Dan. There are these 6 types. Do you have to pick one?
No, you don't. And let me show you an example of why you don't necessarily need to. So what you can do based on your business model, you can you'll typically have like multiple revenue streams, right? And I feel like the revenue streams do a couple of things, or at least this is in the context of how we're thinking about it. Number one, it's based on, hey, how is my customer willing to pay? Are they willing to pay a subscription fee, or do they want a one-time buy or whatever, right? And then the other thing is cost-based, right? So the thing with SaaS is, hey, there's infrastructure fees and there's labor fees that are recurring, so it makes sense that we charge people recurring in a recurring manner. So there is one thing, just one example. There are other examples, but my friend and colleague JDM recently turned me on to this thing. Not advertising for these folks, but yo, it's pretty cool. What is it? It's a notepad. It's a digital notepad. And so, Dan, what do you mean? Like, don't you have an iPad for that? Well, I do, but it comes with a dope pencil that, iPad has a pencil too. I get it. But this is like specifically
Any hope we had of Remarkable sponsoring us has been dashed by your very, very
review.
yes, it's just a review that you've got here. Now, the point is, Dan and I have these, and they're awesome, and we highly recommend them. But anyway, so you bought the thing.
I bought the thing. It's cool. I really like it. I like it over my iPad for the simple fact that I can write on this thing using my, with like, it's like got legit palm rejection, right? Like, I don't know about anybody else, but when you write on the iPad with a thing, like I don't want to wear a glove, I don't want to like hold my hand over the thing. That's annoying, right? It's not like writing. This is. And so that's why I like it. Anywho, so check it. It's a product. So I bought it. I bought the hardware. I had the option to subscribe to a Remarkable Connect service, which basically meant that all my documents that I create on the Remarkable are cloud accessible, and I can do share screen and I can do presenting and all that kind of stuff. I opted not to do that in the beginning. And it comes with a dope pencil. And this isn't the only pencil. In fact, they call it a marker. There's another marker. So I got the cheap one at $59. I think it was 49 or $59. JDM, on the other hand, is a little more highbrow than Dan Casas Murray. He got the dope ass pen or marker that when you flip it upside down will erase. So right now I have to push an extra button to get my text to erase on the thing. So anyways, revenue streams, right? Like, where are we at with this? So
Right.
this product has multiple revenue streams and all look the same, or they look different, right? So there's the asset sale, which is the actual thing. There's a subscription model, which is the actual like the connect to the cloud and stuff like that. And they also have this ecosystem that is actually starting to develop, right? Apps, different things, right? So that's also like some other things that are in there that are giving them the ability to create more revenue streams based on on other vendors accessing the platform. And then of course another piece of hardware that's upgradable. So can you have multiple revenue streams? Absolutely. And I feel like typically you do. It's these the 6 basic revenue streams are basically they're building blocks, right? And you can like mix and match them depending on who your customer is and how they like to pay, and then what, where the cost centers actually are.
Right. And I feel like that you're hinting at something else there that's going to come back. This is foreshadowing, because it wasn't just different revenue streams that you were identifying too. You were also identifying different patterns, right, in the business model. There was like e-commerce, because you bought the thing online, right?
I did.
And then they have,
it's true.
The pencil that you can buy, but they also had an upsell option on the pencil. That's a pattern, right? Yep. And then they had a subscription service for the device, which is a revenue stream, but also is a razors and blades model, right?
Yeah.
If you want to think about it that way.
Uh-huh.
And this this device is clearly targeting people who have at least a small amount of disposable income, right? Because like you mentioned, you already have an iPad and you don't want to Michael Jackson it with a single glove, in order
That's
to
right.
not do the palm rejection. So yeah, right. So that it's kind of like catering more to an affluent audience, which is also a pattern here. So just seeing all these patterns like in business model. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Come back to that
Oh,
foreshadowing.
we will. We will. We will. As it turns out, there are actually 55 different patterns of business models that we can actually look at. And the thing is that, hey, look, you don't have to just, like commit to a specific model. Like a model we're going to see next is basically a system. It's a system of behaviors of the customer, of operations, of finance. And
Right.
when you change one, just like there's a ripple effect into all those other different areas, right? And so there's this paper out there that basically lists, hey, these are basically the 55 different types of patterns that we have seen in the wild, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that like they have like they're pure patterns and they have to stay pure patterns. We can mix and match those business models, which is great. Permutations, all the things, right? We can come up with business models ad infinitum, right? Which is awesome, gives us a lot of flexibility, but it also, confuses things. So what I want to do is I want to break this stuff down. Like, so we talked about revenues, but I know that there's more to that picture. Like, what is a business model then?
Yeah, so that's a big question, right? Because so when we talk about business model, most people do reductively think of it as like it's how I make money. My business model is I charge a subscription fee, or my business model is I sell the product at Walmart, right? And we think about that, but that's actually not sufficient enough. So if you think about a business model canvas, right, which is a tool that we often use in the innovation space, the business model canvas has 9 boxes, right, on it of different things. Only one of which is what your actual revenue model is, because a business model is much more broad than that. When we're talking about business models, I personally find most helpful to use the simplest possible definition of a business model. And so this is an adapted version of some research that came out of St. Gallen's University from Oliver Glassman and Carolyn Frankenberger. And it's
And
called the
everybody
magic triangle.
yeah, it's awesome. Like
So it's
I'm a business model canvas person. Josh introduced this triangle, and forsooth, it is living up to its name as magic.
so it's weird because it's not a tool like the business model canvas. I'm going to show it in just a second, but I want to say like what we're trying to do here
Show
is
me
we're
the
trying to.
triangle.
All right, I'll show you the
I'm
triangle,
just, I'm
Dan.
just
Here.
kidding. I just wanted to say
No,
that.
no,
Keep
you
going.
get it. Now you get the triangle. All right. Now you get the triangle. All right. There's your triangle. Okay. So this is a version of the magic triangle, right? And it's
Okay.
4 components. At the center of our business model, we have our customer, right? That's duh,
Makes
right?
sense.
Instead of any business model,
Yeah.
we have our customer. It's design thinking 101, right? So we have that. But what we're trying to do is answer 4 questions. It's for whom are we creating what value? How are we getting that value to them? And why does that make money?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who, what, how, and why. Any business model always answers those 4 questions, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about a business model canvas is a more detailed version of this. The 9 boxes break down into these 4, right? The revenue logic, the why of this breaks down into the bottom 2 boxes of it, where we have the revenue logic and we have the cost structure, right?
Yeah.
Both of those, obviously, if your cost structure is greater than your revenue logic, it doesn't make money, right? So the answer, why does it make money? It doesn't, right? But that breaks down into that. How in value chain, we're talking about channels. We're also talking probably about partnerships and some other things that go involved in there as well, right? So the business model canvas can be abstracted away to this level, because all business models, regardless of what you're doing or who you are, all of it, even if you're a nonprofit, it comes down to this same 4 basic questions. So it's who is the customer, right? That's who are we serving. The value proposition is the what, like what is the product, right? And why is that valuable for that customer, right? The value chain or the value network, or however you want to call that here. This is how is that value that we're creating in this product actually getting to the customer? How do we produce our offering and put it in front of them. If that's SaaS, right, we have some web app that we're getting to them, that we're marketing to them in particular ways. If it's a mobile app, we have to get that to them through the Apple Store and through the Play Store, right, et cetera, et cetera. Physical
Yeah.
products have a whole supply chain that goes along with that, right? And then lastly, why does it make money? This is like, we have to not only generate profit, but that profit has to be generated sufficient to be in excess of our costs and to be worth money. So why does this make money? It's always those four questions. This is the magic triangle. Whenever you're thinking about any business endeavor, always think about it as, for whom am I creating what value? How am I getting it to them? And why does that make money? Always those four things.
I like that. That's nice and simple, because, I mean, the business model canvas is great. Business plans, okay, whatever, right? Yes, when it's appropriate. But this triangle is really awesome because it helps me I can hold it in my head. I can be like, oh, wow, business model. Okay, all four of those things, answering all four of those questions, I could do that immediately, right? And I don't have to sit down with my whiteboards and sticky notes and all that other kind of stuff. And okay, so then I'm basically remembering this. That magic triangle is a set of rules, just like kind of like physics, that governs the behavior of customers, operations, and financing, right?
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
okay, so are these once you, like, is this a static picture? Like, is there like a truth business model? Does it never change, like, once you dial into it, or like, how does that magic triangle work dynamically, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that two ways, right? So the broadest picture is that a business model is never static. If it is, you're going under, right? It's just a question of when. So when you're really early on in a business, you're coming up with these four things and you're trying to figure out what's my riskiest assumption in those four things. And then I'm going to go figure out how to test that. And I'm going to get in front of customers, or I'm going to build a thing. And eventually you find product market fit. And we're like, oh, it worked. We're done now, right? Only we're not, because eventually we're going to try to find ways to increase the value that we're offering, to introduce new value, to add value. We're going to try to find ways of capturing more value, like selling a Remarkable pencil with an eraser on it, right? Or originally when Remarkable launched, they did not have Remarkable Connect, right? So their business model is constantly changing over time to create more value. And also, as you get really well established and you become a big incumbent player, and you think that like there's nothing but success in front of us, you should remember the percentage of Fortune 500 companies that have been there for 20 years consistently shrinks, right? Because they're constantly falling out of the Fortune 500. Why? Because new companies like Uber, for example, are coming in and disrupting that industry. And so if you want to stay ahead, you also over time have to keep updating your business model, right?
I mean,
So
that
that's
sounds
like,
kind of risky too, though.
well,
Why
yes,
change a
which
good
is,
thing, right?
well, yes, but there's a difference between, and there's a whole process that you can follow through that maybe we'll talk about in a little bit, but that you can use to kind of do this. You definitely don't want to just shift your business model overnight, right? Just like a startup, you want to test that. You want to figure out what's a small bet that I can make, right? That
Yeah.
might lead me in that direction. But when you talk about the risk, right, that goes right back to the relationships in this system, right?
Okay. What
And
do you
so
mean?
when we think about like changing something like that, we could be talking about changing our value prop, or we could be talking about changing our value chain. The reason this triangle also helps us think about it as a model is that you can see what it touches, meaning it touches everything else. So if I need to change the value chain, it's probably also changing the customer and the value prop and the revenue logic.
Okay, so can we look at the Remarkable here for a second then, and
Yes.
kind of play with this? Okay, so as we know, folks, if you're just joining us, we're talking about this thing. This is basically a digital notepad, right? So it's not an iPad. It's a thing. Think like an expensive Etch-a-Sketch, without the knob.
Any possibility of our sponsorship is now completely
I know it's
gone.
gone, yo. It's gone. So okay, so we're looking at this thing, right? And they have there's the product, the actual thing. There's an accessory, and then there is connecting to the cloud, basically the connection service, right? So can we put that triangle back up for a second? So let's play with this for a minute. So the value proposition is basically the digital thing along with the accessory and then the subscription, right? So for who is it for? Uh, people people like you and me that are live. I don't know who their customer is, but you alluded to it a little earlier.
Yeah,
Um,
they have multiple customer segments, right? But it's those
yeah,
who want, like, to oversimplify, it would be a customer who is probably at least slightly affluent because the device, they aren't cheap. It's not a device you can't live without, right? So they are
right.
going after slightly luxury market, but also they are it's paper, right? It doesn't do color at all. So you're talking about somebody who likes paper and is good with paper, but also
Mm.
wants a digital copy, right? And so, like, people like you and me, Dan, we would draw something down on paper and take a picture of it because and then throw away the paper because I don't really want the paper. I just want the
Right.
convenience of the paper without the
Yep.
palm rejection, right? I prefer things digitally.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like writing on paper. I like it. But yo, I have like 5 different notebooks and stuff like that, right? So this is cool. This is one notebook that I don't have to like worry about. You know what? Actually, the thing I really like about it is um is I like to draw stuff on there, right? And a lot of times with pencil and paper, you're committed. You can't like yeah, you can erase it, but like if you have a bunch of stuff that you need to resize and put up here in the corner so you can like think about something else concurrently, then you can't. But this thing you can, which I
Right.
really like.
But so like, okay, so back to your example, right?
Yes, thank you.
So if we look at the triangle here, like, one of the things that they could do, right? So I bought it directly through their website, all right, or rather, it was a gift from my wife, and she bought it through their website. But
Yeah,
like, right, anyway, so like you can buy straight from the website, but another value chain change could be selling it on Amazon, for example,
yeah.
right? And
That
if you were to
would
sell it on Amazon, that probably is going to impact who the customer is
not only
because
that, it would probably. I'm wondering if it would change the price of it as well, right? Because as it is, it comes straight from the vendor. It came from Hong Kong through DHL to my place, right? So I was like, wait a minute, that's
right.
not my typical Amazon experience.
Right. And even if it didn't change the price, right, it would change the revenue logic because Amazon's taken a cut,
Yeah, that's right.
right? And we don't know. I don't have any visibility into what Remarkable's current supply chain actually looks like, right? So it's probably more expensive to sell it on Amazon than it is to sell it direct, but you also get a bigger market, right?
Uh huh.
So you're changing the who and you're changing the why at the
Yeah.
same time in a very dynamic way. And so back to your point, like, that introduces this idea of risk. And then when you go and say, all right, we actually want to add in a premium pen, or we want to add in, this subscription model for Remarkable Connect, what we're doing there too is also we're intentionally changing the revenue logic while we're changing the value proposition, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to say we're going to deliver this connected value at the same time that we're going to manipulate the revenue logic, because this thing probably costs us money to do, and it's added value, and people should pay for greater value. So you do that kind of logic there too. But this shows you, like, you can't just tweak one thing, right? You have to start playing with it until the whole model makes sense. If you had just
Yeah.
started with, we're offering this online service, right, for the Remarkable, then you might notice eventually a disconnect because you're offering this online service, but they only paid for the device up front.
Yeah.
So they
Yep.
paid you once and you're paying for them
Over and over
forever.
again for a long time. Right.
Right. And so
Yeah.
basically you have to subsidize current users with future sales. And that's not necessarily bad. Plenty of companies do it. But if there are other ways to do that, one way to do that is to have to pay for that online service. Another way is if you just think about your smartphone, or before that, an iPod or anything like that. The app stores do a similar function for the manufacturers, where because you can go in and buy it and buy an app, and they take a cut, right?
Mhm.
So it's still tweaking these kinds of things by implementing those patterns.
So I like this idea that okay, this magic triangle is actually a fluid dynamic triangle. It's not just this static picture. Um, but that makes me ask the next question is like, okay, well, how dynamic is it? Like, is it going to change immediately? And oh, by the way, like if I looked at my business model and I wanted to like quote innovate on it, or I've just open the thinking about new things, like where would I start?
Yeah. So okay. So That's a good question. I think there's probably like there's a formal way to do that, right? We can talk about an algorithm. But I think before we do, I'm kind of curious, like just from a practical perspective, like how would you approach that, Dan?
Well,
Like if you're looking, you have an idea for a business, right? And or you're talking to a founder because like you do every day and they have an
or
idea
a
for a
million.
business and they're
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to come up with the right business model for this thing because I just have this idea for this software product that I want to do or whatever, right? And that's where they're starting is I think it'd be cool if I built this thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, well, bro, if you build that thing, you need to build a business model around the thing, right?
Yes. Yes.
So how
Yeah.
do you get started with that? Like, how do you actually start the process of building a business model?
Okay. So I get it. Right. So for me, it's all about my approach, right? And so I can approach either from the customer side, or I can approach it from the product side, or I can approach it from the revenue side, right? And this is kind of like, but I mean, for me, I've gone through this process myself and have a bunch of fails under my belt, and so I know what works for me, um, right? They're learning lessons.
That's right. That's
So
right.
so for me, what I like to do is I'll get like an idea, or I'll see a need or something like that, and I'll be like, that's interesting. So I will identify the domain in which this business will be, right? And then I say, okay, well, that's the domain, and I don't want to like drill down on it specifically yet. Really, what I want to do is say, okay, who are the people that are in that domain? So I'll start lightweight with a value proposition or an idea, and then I'll go drill into who, like who would be the people. And so I'll investigate that for a while. And once I find something that seems to be the truth, in other words, recurring patterns and demands or questions or answers from customers, then I'll start thinking about, okay, what is this thing's form factor? And so once I have the customers, then I'll start building a thing. And then after that, for good, better, or worse, I then start to understand, okay, well, this is what they want, this is what I can make, and is this actually going to financially make sense? So that's my process.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So you're picking a starting point essentially, and then just kind of building out from there.
Yeah, like, yes. So I mean, okay, so for me to actually like create a customer base first and then create a product after that, that would seems kind of like a little backwards, right? And I think it trips a lot of folks up in the beginning, especially, even me. Like, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, oh, I'm going to sell something that's not there. That seems a little scammy, right? And I don't want to be that guy. So I think this is where we're getting this idea of, your first product should be ugly. You should be embarrassed by your first product, or it just needs to test a thing. The idea of a minimum viable product kind of comes out of this, right? It's like, hey, wait a minute. I have to test these things at the same time, or one right after the other, but I have to do it all three of them, right? I have to test desirability, I have to test feasibility, and I have to test viability, right? And once I establish little sets of truth on which I can rely and that I can repeat, then I can move along to the next stage, which is starting to build out. So it's weird, right? It's not like, hey, I'm building a house brick by brick from the bottom up. It's more
Right.
like I'm building a sort of like a giant snowball, right? I have to start at the core, and then I have to add a layer, and then add a layer, roll it around a little bit, let it get bigger. That kind of thing. And so it doesn't matter where you start now. You could start on the product side. Okay, I have an idea for a product. I'm not going to build it out specifically yet. I'm just going to like throw it out there and see what happens. But then you also have to like start looking at customers. And then once people say, yeah, I'd buy that, you say, okay, buy it now. How much? And if they're like,
Right.
oh, I was just kidding, then okay, maybe I should just like, look at something else. Or if they're like, take my money now, I don't care how janky it is, then you got a thing, right?
Right. So
That
it's like
hopefully
start
doesn't
with
open
what
you up to lawsuits.
right, ideally. So you start with what you know, but the goal is to build outward from that into the full business model.
Yeah,
And then once you have the full business model, you have a house of cards because it's all built on assumptions.
right.
And so now you got to go out and like test it.
Yeah. Yeah. And eventually then I see this magic triangle, which is in the beginning, it's very ethereal, right? It's kind of hard to pin down and everything like that. But as I go, I start to understand where the truth is. And eventually what happens is I have this little magic triangle that is actually functional, and I can see the
Right.
pieces moving, and I can see it all happening. And that's actually pretty dope for me anyways.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's the thing, right? There's the model. And at the beginning of the show, we said, okay, well, we're going to show you like what this actually looks like and how we and what a business model actually is. So we talked a little bit about revenue streams. We talked a little bit about like, how do you mix and match those, and then what's an actual business model. Now I feel like the reason why you all came here today is because we need to know, okay, well, this is great, but how do we do it? So JDM, tell us on a high level, just so we're wading into this, like, how do we actually get started? Like I talked about what I'd like to do, but how do we actually start playing around with business models in a way that yields good things for us?
Yeah. Okay. So this can be an extraordinarily complicated subject. So I like your idea of like, let's just dip our toe in the water, start there, and then we'll
Oh, we getting
we'll start to dip
complicated.
in. Because we don't get there. Like this is what happens when we chat. Our viewers know what to expect.
It just
So
happens.
it just happened. All right. So when we're talking about this idea of like coming up with business models or innovating on an existing business model, what we're talking about really is, just to summarize, is we're trying to, if we go back to our magic triangle here, we're talking about coming up with hypotheses in these 4 areas to cover this thing. And they're just hypotheses, but we're trying to get there. And
okay, wait. I have a question. What's the difference
Yes.
between this and design thinking?
Actually, that's a great question. So the difference between this and design thinking is that this is happening in the context of design thinking. So design thinking is a broad set of tools that we use in a way of thinking about things that allows us to answer a question that is fundamentally unanswerable. That what we call a design question, right? That's a wicked problem, if you will. You can check out our past live show on design thinking if you want to learn some more about that. We'll drop the card on here for the replay. But anyway, so the idea is like, yeah, you start with your customer, you do empathy, and then we start to define, and we iterate, we ideate until, and then we come up with a prototype of some kind, we test it, right? We go through that process. Well, the thing that we're developing is the business model. That's our wicked question. Because at the outset, we're saying like, we want to come up with this thing, but we don't know what it is yet. And we're just trying to solve this problem and make some money doing it, right? Like that's our thing. And so that's a pretty open-ended thing. We go through design thinking to actually arrive at this thing at the end of the day.
Okay, so we can use design thinking for an actual product or an experience, but we can also use design thinking to create a business model.
Right. And I would argue that you should, right?
Because that seems pretty meta, like I'm thinking fractals here. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. But I mean, design thinking is a tool set, right? That we use, but it's also a way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
That allows us to be more creative in a systematized way.
Well, you mentioned metacognition.
I did.
Thinking about thinking.
Which
is what you do.
It's my specialty, yes. So I can't help but make everything's metacognition when you get down to it.
Okay. All right. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we want to come up with this thing. We want to come up with, this little model that we've got here. We want to end up here. But what we also talked about was that when you make changes in any of these, like it changes others. And the reason for that is that they have relationships.
Yeah.
Those relationships are also things that we can call patterns. And so you mentioned earlier, Dan, this idea, back to that in just a second. But the idea here is that you have different ways of interacting with these constituent components. So e-commerce is a way of the how, right? Interacting with the who, right? That's about how we're actually getting the thing to the customer. The customer goes online and they buy it, right?
Yeah.
But you could also have, for a similar thing, you could sell it inside of a store. You could do a retail pattern, right? Or you could do a shop in shop pattern. This is where you like go into Best Buy and they have like the Microsoft section, and they have the Apple section, and they have the Google section, and the Samsung section, right?
You know what? I went to JCPenney's and I saw like that shop in shop model eventually. Do you know how long it took me in my life to understand that?
It's it's crazy, right? Because it's most people aren't recognizing it for what it is. That this
43
was
years,
actually
bro.
see because
43 years.
it was
I'm
so like
slow.
this the shop in shop is actually what saved Best Buy from Amazon
Ha. Okay.
because it
Do tell.
allowed them. Well, yeah. So this we'll do a quick aside on this. So what had happened was that Best Buy was getting a lot of competition from Amazon, but people still wanted to shop in person. So people would go to Best Buy and they'd look at the device while their phone with Amazon, right? And they'd order the product that they saw there on Amazon because you get the quick shipping and this price competition and all that kind of stuff too. But so Best Buy realized that their value proposition was in the that their value proposition was really in like getting people to try out things. So that led to something was actually rather kind of crazy and complicated, that they were servicing Amazon but not really servicing themselves. And so that they started to lose out. And so what Best Buy did was that they started to say, okay, but we can take companies like Apple and Google and Samsung and Microsoft and more and actually charge them money. We can do a leasing pattern to them that Dan was talking about before and actually get them to pay for this space because it's the space that those customers want. Because to Samsung, it doesn't really matter that much if they bought it at Best Buy or if they bought it at Amazon. It just matters that they bought the Samsung product, right? So like that actually saved them from there is actually by rescuing that little pattern. So I saw you hopped off for a second there, Dan. This is the fun of a live show.
Yeah, it was dope because I kind of lightweight panicked a little bit. But you carried the day, I'm sure.
Well, yes, that's because as my buddy Kirk dropped in the chat there, I am meta. That's just how I roll.
You know?
Awesome. But okay, so back to the thing. So we have we just named a few of those patterns, right? And there are 55 such patterns. The basic way that this works at the end of the day is you take some of those patterns, right? And you apply them to your business model or your business model hypotheses, and you see what comes up from there by inserting in what would happen if we did a shop in shop. What would it look like if our business was e-commerce? What would it look like if we did a subscription model? What would it look like if we did a razors and blades model? Those all become hypotheses of business models that you could then flesh out and test using lean startup.
I really like that. That makes it like super easy to actually implement, right? So I'm sitting there with a business model, like I'm making cupcakes or I'm making like digital notebooks or I'm making an app for that or something like that. And if something isn't working or I just want to proactively mess with it because I have loads of time on my hand, all I have to do is map out my model, check it, look at another type of model and say, okay, what would happen to my existing model if I change this particular aspect, right? And then just kind of follow through all the steps there.
Yeah, basically. So you can start with this idea of the patterns, right? And the patterns are all based again on this magic triangle, right?
Okay.
So there's a website that you can visit. It's pretty cool. It's businessmodelnavigator.com if you want to check it out. And again, we'll throw that in a card and we'll put it down in the comments in the description. But that's from the same people I was talking about from University of St. Gallen before, who created the initial magic triangle. But they also have this list of patterns that you can pull up, and they have all 55 patterns just listed here. I'm just showing you a quick screenshot, but they have all 55 patterns just listed here for us to go with. So you can literally go and play with these, and you can click on any one of them that you want to, and and they will give you tons more detail on that pattern. So like this is RevShare, and here's how RevShare works, and here's some examples of RevShare. Here's some case studies, right? It's like Google's done this, and Groupon's done this, and Kindle's done this, and like here's all this stuff works, right?
Wow.
And so you can figure out like, oh, here's what this pattern means. And you can literally go through this 4-step process for identifying business model hypotheses. It's called the 4 I's.
Okay.
So the 4 I's are initiation, ideation, integration, and implementation. All right. So
4 I's sounds easy to remember.
Sounds easy to remember, the 4 I's,
but
right?
break it down,
so,
break it down.
We'll break it down. So 30,000 foot view. Initiation is you have to understand the now. This is where you have to understand the internal and external ecosystem. You have to understand what your business is doing, depending on how established you are, right? You have to understand what the marketplace looks like. And going back to our design thinking, you have to understand your customer. You have to understand and gain empathy and do all of that, right? So you have to understand where you are making your play.
Got
right?
it.
You have to understand that ecosystem.
we're mapping out our model and we're seeing like, hey, we're just taking stock of where we're at like right now.
Right. Before we start messing with
Initially in the
patterns, let's
initiation stage.
yeah, what do we know? What do we not know? Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And what do we need to know? Like, what does the market look like? What are customers currently buying? What is our competition doing? Right. There's all those questions that we just really have to find answers to. So that's
Okay.
initiation. So we start this process by understanding our ecosystem.
Makes sense.
Second I, ideation. This is when we actually just go through those 55 patterns and we start overlaying them on our current business model in whatever stage that looks like, however complete or incomplete it is at the moment, however early stage or late stage you are in this process, whether you're in market yet or not. You start overlaying them on top of each other to create ideas. Right? Then you move on to integration, which is the last step of the design process. So this is where you integrate that the promising hypotheses, right? The promising patterns into your business model. This is, if we want to oversimplify, create a business model canvas that's your organization plus that pattern. And this is where you look at those relationships between different parts of the triangle, right? And you see what would it look like to change this or that, if we want to do, how would it change our business model if we started doing a rev share, right? So rev share introduces
Yeah.
some new revenue logic, but also obviously changes the value proposition because somebody's getting rev share out of it, right? Which is also changing the who, and does that change our delivery mechanism, right? So you see how all those principal parts change, and you can think about it as a more complex ecosystem, right? This is a complex process. So you integrate that into a business model and you come up with an hypothesis of here's the thing that we want to look at. The last step is implementation. Now, what this does not mean is now we are ready to go out and just build everything. It means that we have to start prototyping and validating. This is where, to go back to your question about design thinking, we kind of exit the design thinking leadership and move into lean startup leadership. This is build, measure, learn. What's the smallest thing we can build or prototype to get validation on the most risky assumption in that business model? We go out and test it, and we revise our business model based on our learning. We build again, and we measure and we learn. We build and measure and we learn. We build and measure and learn
Yeah.
until we get to a thing that makes more sense, and we're just increasing the size of the bet as we go along. So that's the process: initiation, ideation, integration, implementation.
I like it. I like it because okay, so now I have some tools, right? So we're talking about business models in the very beginning. Like I was just thinking about, oh, what would it look like if I just was able to charge customers differently? But it turns out that it's actually much more than that. It's looking at this triangle. It's like, okay, for whom am I building what, why, and what was the other thing? Like, how's it going to make money?
Right.
Right. So we saw the revenue streams were only like one part of that. And I'm like, okay, well, how do we do this? And you're like, yo, I got you 4 steps. Number 1 is basically like taking stock of where we're at. Number 2 is looking at all those patterns and saying, okay, well, like what would it look like? Like, let's just take one of those patterns that we'd like, overlay that on top of the business. Number 3 is playing around with it. In other words, like thought exercise, right? Thought experiments of what would happen to our customers if we change the value chain, or what would happen to the finances if we change the customers. And then once we do that, then the 4th step is like, okay, well, now that we have a hypothesis, because we haven't done anything yet, let's test it. Right? And that's what the 4 I's are all about.
That's right.
So
you're going
okay. So it's a breakdown of a process. It's a very simple process that I feel like a lot of us intuitively know. But once we start, taking all those genies out of all those bottles, it does look a little complicated, right? And so those 4 I's
it
can
does.
help us help us stay on track.
Right. And I think the part that's counterintuitive to a lot of people is exactly how the design part intersects with the reality of it. Right. This is why it's so revolutionary when Steve Plank like really propagated the idea that, there are no facts inside the building.
Yeah.
Right. Because the idea is you can't just say, this is what I think my business model is, let's go build the thing. No, you have to figure out, how do we prototype this in the smallest way possible? Right. How do we get feedback that we're on the right track right now, and then leverage that feedback to create learning, right? Validated learning that we can then leverage to move forward. And that's the counterintuitive part of design thinking, of lean startup more broadly. And so in this case, I think you're right that like this idea of, initiation, ideation, integration, implementation does make intuitive sense, but we have to be careful that we're not making bets too big too soon, because we're front loading too much risk, right?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so that seems like a pretty sneaky challenge that always comes, at least in my thought process, it always comes up, right? It's like, well, I don't know if this is going to work. I just need to try it. Well, think again, dude, because if you try that, like time, money, and other resources, like the gray hair doesn't go brown again, right? Like I'm taking life off of me if I make a wrong call here. Um, so
Too true.
yeah, so that's a tricky thing. Like, how do you navigate? Like, how do you know when? Like, I don't know. Can we talk about bet size for a second?
Yeah. So
Okay, so like we're going through this whole process, right? We went through the four eyes and everything like that, and so now we're on the fourth eye, and we're like, okay, well, how do I tell that I've cast too big of a vision? Like,
so I would say that that's not the right question,
okay,
right? So it's not the right question to say, like, how do I know if I'm casting too big of a bet?
yeah,
The question is, am I casting a small enough bet? You don't want to think about how big, like you don't want to start, because that means you're already thinking about, there's a thing here, and how do I know if it's too big? Instead, you want to say, what is the smallest possible thing that I can do to answer the next question I need to ask? And
I
so
like
if
that.
you start breaking down your business model into hypotheses, right? Which we know from startup, we have this idea called assumptions mapping, where we take our business model and lots of other things too, and we start documenting what's every single assumption that's baked into that. Everything from customers want this to they're willing to pay this amount for it, to the right way that they want to pay for that is as a subscription, that they want to pay monthly, right? All that stuff is just baked in to our business model, and it's assumptions up the wazoo. And so the first thing
Yeah.
we do is list all these assumptions out. Then we take those assumptions and we figure out how much do we know about them. Are these assumptions that are really uncertain? We have no data, or are these assumptions that have lots and lots of data, right?
Mhm.
And so then we take the ones that have no data, right? And then we look at the ones that have the least amount of data and look at also, are these the ones that are most important to our success, right? And in other words, are more critical if we're wrong, right? Or are these the ones that aren't very important? So we take the ones that are really uncertain and really important. And that's the first thing we have to learn, because if we're wrong, we literally sink the entire effort. And so
Okay.
now we say, so the question is, what's the smallest bet I can place
Mm.
that gives me data on that one thing?
I love how that is the right question, because like as you said, like when I was asking that other question, which was how do I know when it's too big or when it's too risky, you're like, yo, you're thinking about this like deductively. We need to think about this inductively, right? Like instead the question is what's the next smallest step that we can take forward?
Right.
And what I got from you was that, okay, well, basically to answer that question, you have to look at your assumptions and understand, okay, what's the riskiest assumption and what do we not have data for? I feel like there's a Googleable tool for this.
Do you feel like there's a Googleable tool for this?
Well, I kind of know there is, but I was hoping that you could enlighten everybody as to what would you type in if you were looking for a tool that could help you with this process of assumptions mapping.
Well, I mean, I think you could Google assumptions mapping and
Yeah,
get something
right.
pretty good out of it. If I'm being honest, like just Google assumptions mapping and you're gonna get a thing. Um,
Yeah, so it's a
but
matrix, right? So
yeah,
that's what it looks like. It's basically like this matrix. It's like would you call it a four quadrant matrix, or is it a one quadrant matrix?
right. Yes, exactly.
Which one
It's
is it?
I would call it I call it an uncertainty matrix, right?
Great.
But there are different people plot it different ways. Some people do it in the matrix form, which is a four quadrant thing. Others do it on an XY axis,
Okay.
and so it's going to depend on how you do it. But if you just Google assumptions mapping, you'll get the uncertainty matrix there, or grid, and whichever one you use, none of them are wrong, but they're going to show you the exact same thing that we're trying to map out.
Okay, so wait, so we talked about four steps. Is this now like the invisible step number 5, the bonus step is assumptions mapping?
No, I actually think it's part. I mean, okay, we can think of it that way, but it's really part of this idea of prototyping and validation.
Yeah.
So when we
Yeah.
say it's
Yeah.
that we want to implement, it's like we need to prototype and validate. What do we want to prototype and validate? Well, we don't want to build a big thing, so we're going to first prototype the thing that's going to give us the most validated learning for the most critical
Mm.
thing. And so that's
Yeah.
the thing we're going to prototype and then get validation on.
So instead of me sitting here saying, I'm going to prototype the next thing that I think my customers are going to respond to, I'm not doing that. What I'm doing
Right.
is saying, hey, what is that? What is the one assumption that if I'm wrong will kill this entire thing? And I test that
Right.
instead, right?
Right, exactly.
All
Like that
right.
could be, to use like a super trivial example, it could be something like, is Amazon going to take too big of a cut for me to be able to make this worthwhile? Or do I have to jack up my price? And then if I have to really jack up my price, then okay, I have to jack up my price. Now next risk assumption is that too expensive?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going through that process of getting validated learning, tweaking the business model, and then saying what is now, we do assumptions back to me again. What's my biggest assumption risk this time? Now it's the price. Now it's not the manufacturing cost or the distribution cost, it's the price or whatever.
Okay. All right. So check it. I'm now sitting here as an entrepreneur with a startup. Maybe it's been running for a couple of times. Maybe I've got an MVP. I've got some traction, whatever. Maybe. And I'm interested because I just watched this live stream, right? And I'm like, yo, that sounds like some cool stuff. Like, I want to try this. What am I doing? Am I sitting with a pad and a paper in a coffee shop? Am I like in this like mad scientist like land with like hella whiteboards and sticky notes and everything like that? Like, what's the sitch? Like, put me in a place where I can actually start implementing this today. Like, what do I do?
Right. Okay. So tactic time, right? We got the strategy down.
Tactic
Tactic
time.
time. So the what I would say is like,
Getting tactical
yes,
on this bitch.
whatever your tool is, I don't care. Like pen and paper and a Pete's works fine,
Okay.
right?
All
But
right.
if you
That's
are,
good
if
tactic.
it's yes, it's a good tactic. But if you would prefer, you can get a Google Doc in your local third wave coffee shop, and that would also work fine too. It doesn't
All
matter
right.
at the end of the day.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what you really want to do though is always go through that 4-step process in a fairly systematic way. It's an algorithm. So to recap, and this doesn't matter your stage. It doesn't matter if you're not in the market. It doesn't matter if you've been in the market for 10 years. What you're
Huh.
going to do is go through the 4 I's.
So I can use this whenever.
You should use this whenever, right? You're going to use
Awesome.
it a hell of a lot when you're really early on. And then you're going to use it a little less until you don't have to use it anymore. And then now you're doing really well in the marketplace. And then there's going to come a time when you're going to want to be thinking about, I have to worry about obsolescence, or
Yeah.
I have to worry
Yeah.
about succession planning, or I have to worry about whatever in the marketplace. I have to worry about competition. I have to worry about disruptors. And I don't want to worry about disruptors. I want to be a disruptor. And so then you start playing with this thing again. But you're always doing the same thing. You're always saying, what's the current stock? What's happening inside my company? What's happening outside my company? What's happening with my customers? What's happening with the market? What's happening on the regulatory landscape? What are the trends that are out there, right? The sharing economy is a big trend. You also have mega trends like a global pandemic that could change things too. So you start thinking about what's happening out there, and right, and you understand your customers, and then you move on to, okay, now that I have that, let's ideate on what we could possibly do, and you just go through the patterns and you start overlaying them and see what happens, and then you
Like
take
still
the
in the
ones that
coffee shop.
still in the coffee shop. And then you want to take the look interesting and you start breaking those down. And here's what a business model could look like. Then you go through, okay, now it's time to prototype and ideate because I think this one's super interesting. And so in order to do that, you then break it down, find your riskiest assumption, and then you get out of that coffee shop and you find the way to test that thing.
All
And
right. So
then you go and
question,
revise and figure out if you're right.
am I doing this alone or with a team or what?
Well, you're
Because right
doing
now
it with,
it's sounding like just a giant like journaling exercise for business.
well, it can be if you're by yourself, but the exercise is going to be considerably more powerful if you have a team behind you. And there are all kinds of strategies and tactics that you can use to incorporate that team well. But I don't think we got time for those in this. So I think we'll have to do another startup shop talk
You know?
episode on that. So yeah, I think it's probably time to kind of wind this down. We have our culture of starting on time and ending on time. So remember, our question of the day here is, what's a pivot you've made in your business model? Let us know down in the comments below. Really curious to hear about your pivot stories. We love our pivot stories. And as always, Join us every single Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time if you want to join the show live and engage in the discussion in the chat. That's super dope to do. We're going to be live next Friday. That's February 4th at 11 a.m. Hope to see you there. And so Dan, where can people find you on the internet?
Basically, if you Google Dan Casas Murray, that will work. Or you can go just LinkedIn at Dan Casas Murray right there. It's a unique name. It's great. Kind of.
That works very, very well. Okay, great. If you want to check me out, you can hit out rightbox.co, and I'm fairly easy to find there. So last thing we'll say is the ubiquitous, don't miss a show, hit subscribe, hit the bell, get notified when you got upcoming episodes, and we got all kinds of content hopping in on the Rightbox YouTube channel. So stay tuned. And with that, have a great and fantastic weekend, everybody out there, and Dan.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Josh. See you guys later. Thanks for joining us.